Picture this. It's a crisp 1950s Massachusetts morning, sunlight spilling across my retro linoleum floor as the washing machine hums in the background. The aroma of olive oil sizzling in my old cast iron pan cuts through the cool air, and right there begins my little journey back to the Azores. As a thrifty housewife, I've soaked the salt cod overnight, cheap, reliable, and long-lasting, just as Portuguese immigrant families once did after long mill shifts in Fall River. Now imagine me layering tender slices of potato, sweet softened onions, hard-boiled eggs, and flaky pieces of that revived fish, binding it all with golden oil. The fragrance wraps around the house, both comforting and haunting, a reminder of oceans crossed and sacrifices made. For my family, this dish is more than dinner. It's survival dressed as celebration. It stretches across the dinner table, fills lunch pails for my husband's shifts, and delights the kids who tear crusty bread to mop up every garlicky bite. Here's the kicker. Even in my shiny 1950s kitchen, one spoonful carries us back to 1905. Humble recipes like this aren't just meals, they're lifelines, preserving identity through taste. Every bite anchors us to heritage, proof that love and thrift can turn a simple fish into a feast. Imagine this. The steady hum of my Hoover vacuum has barely stopped, and already my enamel pot is working its magic on the stove. Inside, chunks of pork shoulder rest in a marinade of red wine, garlic, paprika, and bay leaves, the kind of overnight ritual Portuguese families once prepared in their cramped tenement kitchens of Fall River. By the time I slip off my apron, the fragrance has filled every hallway, transforming my modest 1950s home into a smoky, spicy haven. For those mill-working families decades earlier, cazuela wasn't just food, it was an anchor. Sunday gatherings meant neighbors carrying loaves of bread to soak up the garlicky sauce, children waiting impatiently for the meat to fall apart at the touch of a spoon. And here, in my suburban kitchen, it serves the same purpose. It stretches on lean weeks, it comforts after endless ironing, and it never requires fancy ingredients. Picture me ladling the stew onto thick slices of bread, kids' eyes wide with anticipation, my husband's shoulders relaxing after a long day. Here's the kicker. What began as immigrant thrift evolved into ritual, fellowship, and joy. Every simmering pot proves flavor doesn't need fortune, and in my retro world, cazuela is more than a stew. It's community served warm. Picture the lively rush of my 1950s kitchen. Pots clattering, the radio humming in the corner, and thin slices of pork sizzling in my skillet. They've been marinating overnight in garlic, white wine, and paprika, soaking up every bit of flavor. In minutes, they're fried until juicy and tender, ready to be tucked into crusty Portuguese rolls. It's the perfect grab-and-go meal for a family always on the move. Imagine me handing one to my husband as he heads out the door for work, another to the kids before school, the juices dripping or spread with sharp mustard. It's quick, cheap, and full of energy, exactly what a busy blue-collar household like mine needs. Decades earlier, in Fall River's crowded neighborhoods, mill workers snatched bafanas from taverns, fueling 12-hour shifts. That same spirit of survival lingers in my kitchen today. But here's the kicker. What began as a humble worker's bite transformed into a badge of pride, sizzling at street festivals and family gatherings alike. Even in my suburban 1950s life, these sandwiches leave the loudest mark. Simple yet powerful, they turn rushed lunches into moments of heritage, proving that sometimes the quickest meals carry the deepest connections across oceans. Imagine walking into my 1950s kitchen after a long morning of scrubbing floors and hanging laundry, only to be greeted by the irresistible aroma of smoke and spice. On the counter rests a platter of linguiça and chorizo, sausages born from thrift and ingenuity, crafted with garlic, paprika, and red wine, then smoked to last through lean times. As a resourceful housewife, I slice them thick and fry them up alongside golden potatoes, crisping in the very pork fat that seasons the air. The taste tells two stories: linguiça with its mild, garlicky warmth, and chorizo with its deeper, smokier punch. Together, they create a feast, one that comforts my family after a day of hard work and keeps the budget steady. In the early 1900s, Portuguese families in Fall River packed slices of these sausages into tins for mill shifts, while children nibbled them in bread for quick, filling lunches. Here's the kicker. Even in my shiny 1950s suburban market, I still see these links hanging in shop windows just as my grandparents did. Serving them with fried potatoes isn't just dinner. It's a humble tradition, a smoky connection across generations, proving that simple foods can nourish both body and soul. Picture this. The clatter of my 1950s kitchen fades as a bubbling pot takes center stage. Inside simmers arroz de marisco, seafood rice, a dish that turns my modest home into a banquet hall. The rice swells in a tomato-garlic broth, while clams, mussels, and shrimp slip beneath the surface, each adding its own whisper of the ocean. For me, a housewife managing both budget and appetite, this meal feels like pure luxury, even when ingredients are stretched thin. Imagine the aroma. Salty sea breeze mingling with the warmth of paprika and garlic, drifting through my small kitchen and coaxing the children to the table before I even call them. On Sundays, after church, I ladled generous portions into deep bowls, my husband savoring every broth-soaked grain, while the kids hunt for shrimp like treasure. For Portuguese immigrants in Fall River decades earlier, this dish wasn't just food. It was memory. Each bite recalled coastal villages and celebrations by the sea, a taste of home thousands of miles away. Here's the kicker. In my 1950s world, arroz de marisco bridges survival and celebration. It transforms simple rice into a feast, reminding us that even in hard times, heritage and pride can simmer together in a single pot. Imagine this. The hum of my 1950s kitchen fades as I drop soft dough into bubbling oil, watching golden fritters puff up one by one. These are malasadas, pillowy Portuguese donuts enriched with eggs and butter, rolled warm in sugar, and kissed with the bright zest of orange. In an instant, my modest suburban home is filled with the kind of joy that turns ordinary afternoons into celebrations. Picture the children crowding near the counter, noses pressed against the window, waiting for the first bite, just like little ones in Fall River neighborhoods did half a century earlier. These sweets weren't everyday indulgences. They were festival treats, made during Lent or for church gatherings, when families stretched what little they had into something magical. In my house, frying dough feels like a small rebellion against the daily grind of chores. Suddenly, the kitchen smells of warmth, sugar, and hope. Here's the kicker. Malasadas were more than dessert. For Portuguese immigrants, they carried tradition, faith, and resilience in every sugary bite. And in my 1950s kitchen, they served the same role. Proof that even the humblest ingredients can create sweetness powerful enough to anchor identity, comfort generations, and turn simple hands into keepers of culture. Picture the bold spirit of land and sea colliding in my 1950s kitchen. The pot on my stove bubbles with pork cubes marinated overnight in garlic and wine, fried until crisp, then simmered alongside briny clams and golden potatoes. The aroma rises rich and layered, filling my home with the promise of something extraordinary. This isn't an everyday dish. It's a Sunday spectacle, saved for when the budget allows a touch of luxury. Imagine the contrasts, the tender pork bursting with flavor, the clams lending their salty ocean kiss, and the potatoes grounding it all in humble comfort. For Portuguese immigrants in Fall River, this dish wasn't simply dinner. It was a proud reminder of their villages, carried across the Atlantic and reborn in Milltown kitchens. At my table, it becomes more than a meal. It's a centerpiece of celebration, a reminder that thrift and festivity can share the same plate. Here's the kicker. Carne de porco a lentejana has outlived generations unchanged. Restaurants still showcase it, but in my 1950s homemaker world, it means gathering my family close, filling the air with laughter, and honoring the heritage that binds us. A humble recipe turned banquet, linking oceans with every bite. Imagine this. The kitchen window is cracked open on a breezy 1950s afternoon, and the unmistakable scent of the sea drifts in, not from the shore, but from my own stove. A whole octopus has been simmering slowly until tender, its curling arms softening in the pot. Then I lift it carefully, brush it with olive oil, garlic, and fresh parsley, and lay it across the grill. The edges char, smoky and crisp, while the inside remains velvety and rich. Suddenly, my modest suburban kitchen feels like a seaside tavern in the Azores. Picture the children wrinkling their noses at first sight, skeptical of this strange creature. But one bite, and they're loyal forever, drawn in by its smoky savor and buttery texture. For Portuguese immigrants in Fall River, polvo grelhado wasn't an everyday indulgence. It was a dish for feast days, weddings, and milestones, carrying pride and memory to the table. In those crowded kitchens, octopus was proof that celebration could rise even in times of struggle. Here's the kicker. Decades later, restaurants still showcase it as heritage on a plate. In my 1950s homemaker world, serving grilled octopus isn't just cooking. It's preserving identity, honoring the ocean, and turning family meals into timeless traditions. Picture this. A cloudy 1950s afternoon in Massachusetts, the kind where laundry hangs heavy on the line and the house smells faintly of starch. In my kitchen, though, the air is alive with the scent of the sea. Monkfish, often called the poor man's lobster, simmers in a pot with plump shrimp, tomatoes, onions, and garlic, all melting into a broth that embraces every grain of rice. The mixture bubbles steadily, promising comfort, richness, and a taste of the ocean that once sustained immigrant families across the Atlantic. Imagine my children at the table, forks poised eagerly as they dig through the rice to uncover shrimp like hidden jewels, while my husband spoons up the broth-soaked grains with quiet satisfaction. For Portuguese millworkers decades earlier, this dish was a gift from New England's coastline, humble enough to be affordable, yet elegant enough to carry pride. It was survival wrapped in luxury, a reminder of what the sea could provide even in tough times. Here's the kicker. In my 1950s homemaker world, arroz de tamboril con gambas is more than just a Sunday meal. It's heritage in a pot, proof that even the simplest ingredients can echo across generations and anchor identity with every spoonful. It's a Saturday evening in 1957, and the hum of the radio fills the kitchen with soft jazz. I'm at the stove, apron tied snugly, tending to a pot that doesn't look fancy but carries more heart than any gourmet dish, moelas, or chicken gizzards. Simmering slowly with onions, garlic, and a splash of red wine, they release an aroma that makes the whole house feel like home. Now, gizzards may not sound glamorous. In fact, to many American neighbors, they were scraps, often discarded without thought. But to Portuguese families, they were a delicacy of patience and tradition. Every chew revealed a reward of slow cooking, transforming something tough into tenderness through love and time. Picture my children sneaking into the kitchen, dipping bread into the sauce when they thought I wasn't looking, their laughter mixing with the rhythm of the bubbling pot. For my husband, it wasn't just food. It was a taste of the old country, the kind that made him close his eyes and remember meals from his mother's table. Moelas taught us an important truth. The best meals aren't always about expense or appearance. Sometimes they're about making the humble extraordinary, one bite, one memory at a time. The kitchen always felt like pure magic when I made pastéis de nata, those golden Portuguese custard tarts with their flaky crusts and creamy centers. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in 1956, sunlight would stream through the curtains, and the scent of butter and sugar filled every corner of the house. With each stir of the custard, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice guiding me, reminding me to be patient, to whisk slowly, to pour with care. When the tarts finally emerged from the oven, their tops speckled with caramelized spots, it was impossible for anyone to resist. My children would crowd around the counter, their little hands reaching out, even though I warned them they were too hot. My husband, with his newspaper folded neatly on the table, would sneak one before dinner, grinning like a boy caught in the act. These tarts weren't just dessert, they were a celebration. Dusting them lightly with cinnamon felt like crowning them with tradition itself. Each bite held a delicate balance of sweetness and comfort, a reminder of Lisbon's streets lined with bakeries where the air smelled just the same. Pastéis de nata weren't just pastries, they were warmth, memory, and home in every flaky layer. The scent of garlic sizzling in olive oil was enough to draw everyone into the kitchen, long before the clams even touched the pan. Améjoas a bouillon pato, clams cooked in garlic, olive oil, and fresh cilantro, wasn't just a dish, it was an experience. I remember standing by the stove in the late 1950s, apron dusted with flour from the day's bread, carefully washing each clam, waiting for that magical moment when they opened wide and released their briny perfume. The table always grew livelier when this dish was served. My husband would grab a crusty loaf of bread, breaking it apart to soak up every last drop of the garlicky broth. My children, giggling at the way that clams popped open, would compete to see who could eat the most. And when neighbors dropped by unannounced, this dish was my pride. It turned a simple evening into a feast of laughter and storytelling. For Portuguese families in 1950s America, améjoas a bouillon pato was more than food. It was a connection to the seaside back home, where fishermen brought in the catch of the day. Each bite carried the salty breeze of the Atlantic, reminding us that even far from Portugal, tradition still thrived in our kitchens. There was something almost ceremonial about preparing polvo al lagarero, octopus roasted with potatoes, garlic, and olive oil. In the 1950s, it wasn't a dish you made every day. It took patience, and patience was a virtue every housewife understood. I remember placing the octopus in a heavy pot to tenderize it, the steam filling the kitchen, while my children watched with wide-eyed curiosity, unsure how something so unusual could become so delicious. Once roasted, the octopus would glisten under a drizzle of golden olive oil, its edges crisped just enough to hold the smoky flavor. The potatoes, cracked open after baking, soaked up every drop of garlic and oil until they were soft and fragrant, the kind of side dish that could stand on its own. Serving polvo al lagarero always felt like a special occasion, even on ordinary days. My husband would pour a glass of red wine, the children would chatter excitedly, and I felt a quiet pride seeing them enjoy a dish that carried the heart of Portuguese tradition. To us, it wasn't just food. It was a link to generations before us. proof that even in a new country, we could still savor the old world with every bite. Few dishes carried the comfort of home quite like bacalhau bras. Made with salted cod, thinly cut potatoes, and scrambled eggs, it was the kind of meal that filled the kitchen with warmth before it even touched the table. In the 1950s, I would soak the salted cod overnight, the bowl resting quietly on the counter, while the children teased me about how long it took just to make dinner. But that was the beauty of it. Patience always led to something extraordinary. The sizzle of potatoes frying, the aroma of onions softening in olive oil, and the final folding of eggs and cod together, it was music to the senses. I'd sprinkle parsley on top, then crown the dish with black olives, their glossy shine making the whole platter look like a feast. When I brought it to the table, my husband always said the same thing. "This tastes like Lisbon." And in that moment, miles away from Portugal, our little American kitchen felt like home again. Bacalhau bras wasn't fancy, it was humble, filling, and unforgettable. Each bite reminded us that the simplest ingredients, when guided by love and memory, could tell the richest stories.